Hi everybody, this is Merle with Commercial Education and Safety. We've covered in the other sections and segments, we've covered general knowledge. Section 2, we've covered Section 3, which is transporting cargo safely. And now we're moving into air brakes. So that's going to be Section 5 in your driver's manual. There may be small variances in the different states, but we're going to be reading from the Minnesota driver's manual. You can find PDF online. Search CDL driver's manual and it'll be a PDF version. Your state's going to have pretty much the same thing. There's not many differences in the manuals, minus the preface of each book. When you open the book, you got state specific stuff, then you come into the federal things. One of the biggest things I found the differences is when you dim your headlights, oncoming traffic and falling behind. We're going to move into air brakes. So in order to get your Class A permit or your Class B, you have to have general knowledge, transporting cargo safely. Make sure you do that one. That way it covers a lot of the stuff you may have questions about. And then we're coming into air brakes. If you're just getting Class B, this will be the last one you have to do just to go take your test for your permit. If you're going on to Class A, we'll have to add a combination vehicle section to this. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hope you enjoy the class. Give me some feedback if it's helpful, if you use this. And we're going to do it in sections. I'm going to try to keep them shorter, but in the past where I try to keep them 30 minutes, just so many sections. So I have some of them that went for almost an hour, some of them for 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep them sectioned out. So Section 5, we're going to cover this section and we'll get to the knowledge portion of it, the tests and knowledge at the end of each section here, and that's be our stopping point before we move on. If it's a short section, we may move on to the next one, but bear with me, it's flexible. So the air brakes, what does the section cover? It covers air brake system parts, dual air brake systems, inspecting air brakes, and using air brakes. So air brakes, just what it sounds like. It's brakes operated by an air system versus your normal passenger vehicle where they're operated by hydraulic brakes, which is a fluid. It's more direct. Air brakes takes longer to build up air pressure with a compressor. It goes into the tank, and it takes longer for air to travel through the system, which is going to be brake lag, delay in the system. But we'll cover that as we go along, just giving you the basics of the difference between air brakes and hydraulic brakes. So this section tells you about air brakes. If you want to drive a truck or a bus with air brakes or pull a trailer with air brakes, you need to read this section. If you want to pull a trailer with air brakes, you also need to read Section 6, which is going to be combination vehicle. Read the chapters as we go along here. I will be highlighting areas. When I highlight it, you can come back and rewind it and review it. But if I'm highlighting, there's a good chance that it'll be a question on your actual test at the DMV. I may not know all the questions, but I got a pretty good idea of what they are going to ask. Maybe not all of them, because I'm not privy to everyone's questions and their tests from each individual state, but I got a pretty good idea of the questions you're asking. When we're coming through the chapters, they're going to ask something about sections here, so we'll go through it. If it looks pertinent, we'll go ahead and highlight it for you. And it's going to help your study, and go back, watch the section, take notes, come back, watch the section again. When you're ready to go take your test, go take your test. We'll be posting some links to some websites that you can take practice knowledge tests and stuff before you go take your test at the DMV, just to help you prepare a little bit more. And if I keep repeating the same thing over again, it's going to be on your test, I guarantee it. Air brakes use compressed air to make the brakes work. Air brakes are a good and safe way of stopping large and heavy vehicles, but the brakes must be well maintained and used properly. Air brakes are really 3 different braking systems: service brakes, parking brake, and emergency brake. So it's some of the same components as just what's activating. Like with air brakes, it's using compressed air to move your push rod and slack adjusters. Spring brakes, which are your parking brakes, it's all in the one brake chamber, and we'll see some diagrams here shortly as we go through. The spring brakes are part of the brake chamber. You have an air side, then a spring side. So if you run out of air, the spring can take over and still stop you. Emergency brakes and parking brakes, it's the same spring brake system. It's not a separate system. It's the same adjustments. It's the same push rod. It's the same slack adjusters, same linings, same drums or disc and pads. It's the same components. It's just in that chamber which side is activating it. If it's emergency brake, if I'm in an emergency situation, it's an emergency brake. That's your spring brake taking over because you ran out of air or something happened. If it's a parking brake, it's the same thing. It's the same system. It's just I'm parking. So what am I doing Is it an emergency situation? What's an emergency brake? If I'm a parking situation, what's a parking brake? A service brake are your foot pedals or treadle valves, and even on your trailer it has a trailer service brake to isolate your trailer brakes, which we really only use that for pre-trip inspection to isolate the air brakes on the trailer so we can identify to make sure everything's working properly. So don't get confused when you're talking about parking brakes, service brakes, emergency brakes. They're all the same components. Just air operates one part of it, spring or mechanical pressure operates the other part of it. I'll read what it says for you here. So air brakes are really three different braking systems: service brake, parking brake, and emergency brake. The service brake system applies and releases the brakes when you use the brake pedal during normal driving. The parking brake system applies and releases the parking brakes when you use the parking brake control. The emergency brake system uses parts of the service and parking systems to help the vehicle in a brake system failure. So you're using air and spring, you're using everything in that situation. It's the same brake chamber. You have the same compressor, you have a primary and secondary air tanks, and those air tanks feed the brake chambers that are on each axles, on each side of your axles there. But it's the same components. So you got service brake chamber, you have a spring brake chamber. Don't get too confused with it. We'll go into a little bit more detail shortly and we'll talk about those components. So I'm moving into section 5.1, and it's going to be on page 5-1 in your manuals. I'm guessing if it's different, you guys let me know, but I'm guessing that I've seen several different states' versions of these CDL driver's manuals, and once you get past the preface, the state portion in the front of the manual, these pages are all numbered, they're all categorized the same. With a small variance, the biggest thing I saw the difference was in the general knowledge when we're talking about dimming your headlights, oncoming traffic and behind traffic. States are a little bit different there. Minnesota, we have to dim our headlights 1,000 feet for oncoming traffic and 200 feet if I'm approaching from behind to dim our headlights. North Dakota, it's 500 feet for oncoming traffic and 300 feet from behind. So that's small little variances, but other than that, it's pretty basically the same. I haven't seen any major differences other than that in these books, in these manuals. 5.1 says there are many parts to an air brake system. You should know about the parts and discussed here. 5.1.1, we're talking about the air compressor. The air compressor is attached to your engine, and it's just like the air compressors you have at home or at your shop. You plug it in, and a machine makes air and pumps it into a storage tank. So basically that's what it is. You don't have to set and flip switches to turn them off. We'll talk about that in the governor system that turns it on and off. This section is going to be a lot about numbers. So it's important when I start talking about these numbers, and I'm going to say it, and I'm going to keep saying it, and hopefully hearing it enough, you'll remember some of these numbers and what they do. So again, go back through the section when you test yourself and come back and watch it again until you know it. These are the same types of classes I will be giving in a classroom for my students, minus the questions and answers. Obviously we're not doing it live, so I don't have the opportunity to take and answer questions, but a lot of the questions I get, I'll answer here. They're common, frequently asked questions, so you'll get the idea of what we're trying to do. So 5.1.1, the air compressor. The air compressor pumps air into air storage tanks, reservoirs. The air compressor is connected to the engine through gears or a V-belt. I haven't seen the V-belt. I've been driving for 32 years. I've never seen one that's belt driven. The ones I've always seen have always been gear driven, mounted to the engine, which means self-lubricating. If they are belt driven, you may have a separate oil reservoir just for the compressor, but I've never seen one. The modern technology, it just isn't there. If you guys have seen one, you let me know. The compressor may be air cooled or may be cooled by the engine cooling system. It may have its own oil supply or be lubricated by the engine oil. If the compressor has its own oil supply, check the oil level before driving. That would be the type of compressor you'll see in the shop, the big stand-up compressors, and you have to add oil, and it's got belts and components like that. I'm assuming they used to put them on trucks like that where they're belt driven. I haven't seen one. I've been driving since '94 and I've never seen one. First truck I drove was a T600 Kenworth, probably a '92 model, and it didn't have a trailer handbrake, and it didn't even have engine brakes at the time, which nowadays I don't think you can buy one without an engine brake. So that's the difference in the years. Let's move up to 5.1.2, the air compressor governor. So we talked about the air compressor. That's the components attached to the engine that makes the air. A governor, in layman's terms, it tells the compressor when to start and when to stop. We don't want to keep compressing air and overfilling tanks and making them explode or anything like that. So it's got to be able to turn itself on and off, and that's what the governor does. It governs when the air compressor comes on and goes off. So the governor controls the air when the air compressor will pump air into the air storage tanks. When air tank pressure rises to the cut-out level around 125 pounds per square inch, the governor stops the compressor from pumping air. When the air tank pressure falls below the cut-in pressure around 100, the governor allows the compressor to start pumping again. We're going to take a minute here and we're going to talk about the air compressor governor. Again, 5.1.2 in your book in that section. We talked about what it does. It turns it on and off. If it keeps pumping, it's going to send too much air to the storage tanks, which could cause the storage tanks to explode. If the air falls too low, you won't have enough air to stop the vehicle. The important part you want to remember here when we're talking about cut in and cut out. So let's talk about the cut in pressure. I know we're going backwards with it, but the cut in, what does that mean? That means it's cutting in. That means it's turning on. And it says around 100 psi, but don't get confused. It's 100 or less. If I'm setting with 0 psi when I first start my engine, the needle is rising on the gauge. It is cutting in. It is turning on. And it reaches, it says somewhere around 125. That's what the book's saying. But it's 125 to about, I think it's about 125 to about 140, somewhere in that range. So when we start doing our air brake tests on our actual test for our pre-trip, those are going to be a little bit different because we have a new modernization model. You're going to identify where it cuts out at. That ensures that it is turning on like it's supposed to, and it's turning off like it's supposed to. So we're not sitting there flipping switches on our dash trying to turn our air compressor on. It's got a governor, it does it itself. Just like the one you have at home, if you're airing up your tire and you've got a plug-in air compressor, it'll get to an air pressure, then all of a sudden it'll turn itself off, and when you start using it, it'll turn itself back on again. It's the same concept, same type of, same style, same basic, same technology, except ours is on the truck. It's the gears of the engine turn it, it's lubricated by the engine, it turns itself on and off, and it sends air to your storage tanks. But what I want you to remember here, and I'm going to say it a few times just so you get used to it, the air compressor governor cuts in at 100 or less, and it cuts out at 125. Cuts in, turning on, 100 or less, cuts out, turning off at 125. Cut in 100, cut out 125. There's going to be a lot of numbers, so it's very important that you really remember these numbers as we go along. That's the reason I keep repeating them over and over again. Cut in at 100, cut out at 125. Those are your magic numbers, and those are the terminology that you're going to hear. Cut in, cut out, and I've explained what cut in and cut out means. We'll move to section 5.1.3, air storage tanks. When you make that air, it has to go somewhere. Think of it like a fuel tank, but it's air. I have to have fuel for my brakes. It's not fuel, it's air, but we have to have these tanks to store this air. Air storage tanks are used to hold compressed air. The number and size of air tanks varies among vehicles. The tanks will hold enough air to allow the brakes to be used several times, even if the compressor stops working. So you'll have, again, maximum 125, because that's where it cuts out at, based on what your manual is saying here. It's different in reality, but this is what they're looking for on the test. And once you use that air pressure and it falls below 100 or less, the compressor starts building again. Primary and secondary air tanks are fairly the standard practice. With a wet tank, the compressed air, then your primary and secondary. So usually about 3 tanks if you have primary and secondary systems. Nothing to get too excited about, except that storage tanks, that you make the compressed air from the compressor, it sends it to the tank. That's how you get your air to utilize your brake systems, your air seats, anything that's operated by air. My first truck, the windshield wipers were operated by air. Now they're electric. The air horn, it's funny when we get new students, and it doesn't have enough air pressure, and they're trying to blow the horn and raise their seat, and they're convinced that it's broken. It's like, it's air. We have to build the air before all this stuff works. So we're going to move into 5.1.4, air tank drains. So this is very sad. These tanks have drains on them, and they're usually either a twist butterfly valve on it. You can twist it and let the air out, or it's got a cord you pull. This is a little valve that you just pull, spring, and it goes back into place when you let it go. You're draining the air out of it. So why would we even need those? My truck has a air dryer on it. It does, but it's also going to have an air drain tank. Unless you have an alcohol evaporator, which don't see those very often. Usually you have an air dryer, but we'll talk about the alcohol evaporator here in a little bit. But air drain tanks, why do you even have them? When you're compressing air, when your compressed air creates moisture. And again, we talked about the compressor being lubricated by the engine oil. So you'll get a little bit of oil down sometimes in your storage tanks, and you'll get moisture, the condensation from that compressed air. We need to drain those tanks to get the water and moisture out. If we don't, that water and moisture is going to promote corrosion, and it's going to cause rust inside of your tanks. In the wintertime, if it's water and you're below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it freezes. So you don't want water in your tanks and your air lines, your brake system freezing. If you have frozen water inside your lines, you don't have brakes because you're clogging up all your lines and nothing works properly. So that's why we have to have the air tank drains. So why do we have those? To drain the water. Why do we drain the water? Because water freezes. And that's going to be a question on your test. I'll highlight that here for you in a second so you can see how the question will be formatted on there. But just remember, you have air tank drains because water freezes. I'm going to read this over here so you can see what I'm talking about. Compressed air usually has some water and some compressor oil in it, which is bad for the air brake system. For example, water can freeze, and see I'm highlighting that, in cold weather. I don't need the whole paragraph here. Water can freeze. That's why we have drains. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's going to be the testable question that you're going to be looking for. The water and oil tend to collect in the bottom of the air tank. Be sure that you drain the air tanks completely. Each air tank is equipped with a drain valve at the bottom. There are two types: manually operated by turning quarter turn or pulling a cable. You must drain the tanks yourself at the end of each day. Here's another question you're going to get. When do you drain your tanks? At the end of each day of driving. We already got two answers. Actually, so far, we've got a few answers to our air brake test already. Cut in at 100 or less, cuts out at 125. There's one or two test questions already. Air storage tanks, not many questions about that other than that's where the air goes, right? Water can freeze in cold weather. That's why we drain the tanks. When do we drain them? At the end of each day of driving. So we've got several answers already. So as we move on, we'll collect more and more answers to your test questions. You have automatic. Automatic, the water and oil are automatically expelled. These tanks may be equipped for manual draining as well. So you have air dryers, and the air dryers, they're a component, and that's usually where your purge valve is, and it's got a little filter on it. It's about this big around. And it's not like your normal filter, like an oil filter where it's a paper filter or something. If you ever pick up a pack of beef jerky or leather goods or something, in the pack it's got these little packets for moisture. It has that same type of material in little, about the size of BBs inside of it. And that's what it's doing, absorbing the moisture, and that's what the air dryer does. If it's equipped with drains, we still want to drain them. So just remember, even if it's equipped with an air dryer, you still want to drain your tanks at the end of each day. You'll thank me the first time it gets cold. So we're going to move to page 5-2, and we'll look at the top of the page up here. It's 5.1.25, 5.1.5, alcohol evaporator. Some air brake systems have an alcohol evaporator to put alcohol into the air system. This helps reduce the risk of ice in the brake valves and other parts during cold weather. Ice inside the system can make the brake stop working. Check the alcohol container and fill it up as necessary every day during cold weather. Daily air tank drainage is still needed to get rid of the water and oil. unless the system has automatic drain valves. I'm sure they're out there. Just the newest truck I have right now is a 2023 Freightliner Cascadia. It doesn't have it. You still got the manual drains on them. This is for information, but you know what an alcohol evaporator does. Alcohol helps evaporate the water and keep it from freezing. The alcohol doesn't freeze like water does, so it helps. Even if it's got water in it, it's going to help keep your valves from freezing so your brakes work effectively. We'll move to 5.1.6, the safety valve. So we already got some numbers. Let's go back and find these numbers again. We cut in at 100. That means the compressor starts working. The compressor stops working. Cut out at 125. Water can freeze in cold weather, and we drain it at the end of each day of driving. Safety valve. Safety valve is on the storage tanks themselves, and it's a safety valve. The safety relief valve is installed in the first tank the air compressor pumps into. The safety valve protects the tank and the rest of the system from too much pressure. So let's say your governor fails and it doesn't cut out at 125 like it's supposed to. Maybe it goes to 140, 150, 160. By having a safety valve, it's a pop-off valve. It's a spring-loaded valve, and the spring is a 150-pound spring. So when it hits 150 pounds, the valve opens up and expels the air so you don't create a bomb, so it doesn't blow up. All these air tanks have them. I'm pretty sure even the compressors you buy from Home Depot and you take to your house, your home compressor is going to have a safety valve on it because it's got to protect it from blowing up. But the key you want to know here is the safety valve. It's on the storage tank itself, on the first tank it goes into. It's important to know, but it's not going to be on your test, or it shouldn't be. But the valve is usually set to open at 150 psi. So it cuts in at 100, cuts out at 125. The safety valve opens at 150. You see what I'm talking about, these numbers? Cut in at 100, cut out at 125. Safety valve opens at 150 psi, pounds per square inch. Moving on to 5.1.7, the brake pedal. That's a treadle valve. So your brake pedal, that's your service brake pedal. You put your foot on the brake, and it sends air from the storage tanks to the brake chambers, in return operating your push rod and your slack adjuster, pressing the linings against the drum or the disc. And that's what stops the truck. So I'm going to just read it briefly. You put on the brakes by pushing down the brake pedal. It is also the foot valve or treadle valve. Pushing the pedal down harder applies more pressure. Letting up on the brake pedal reduces the air pressure and releases the brakes. Releasing the brakes let some compressed air go out of the system. So every time you push the brake pedal, you are letting air out of the system. You keep that in mind because it may be a question you may have to answer later, but every time you pump the brake pedal, you're letting air out of the system. You're applying it to the chamber, and it goes to the chamber. Once you take your foot off the brake, it goes somewhere, right? It's not going back into the tanks. It's a brake pedal. You have a brake pedal in your car. We know that when we push the brake down, it applies the brake. When we take our foot off of the brake pedal, it releases the brake. Just like it would in your car, just like it would on a 10-speed bicycle with the hand grips. We squeeze the brake grips, and we see the brake pads go against the rim, and we let go, it lets go. So it's the same concept. 5.1.8, foundation brakes. Foundation brakes are used at each wheel. The most common type is the S-cam drum brake. The parts of the brake are discussed below. So S-cam, and we'll talk about that in the diagram on the right hand side of the page here in a second. So they also have wedge style. I've been driving since 1994. I've never seen a wedge style. The one that I've always seen and never seen a different one has always been the S-cam, and we'll show you what's called an S-cam here in a minute. So the parts, you have the brake drums. If you come up here on the right side, you'll see this metal part here. That is the drum. Don't confuse it with the rim of the tire. This is the drum. And inside of there, you have your linings. See, this is a cutaway. In reality, it'd be a solid piece, but you see a cutaway so you can get a visual representation. This will be your shoe and your lining. The lining is the material used to stop it. The shoe is the metal part. So you got them on both sides. And if you look here in the middle, you can see the S-cam. If you look at it, it looks like a backward S, right? So when you do hit the brakes, this S-cam here, it rolls, it twists, and it goes to the high spot of this shoe here. These are rollers right here. So when it twists, it goes to the high spot, therefore pushing the linings up against the drums. So it's an S-cam, it rolls in a circular motion. Brake drums are located on each end of the vehicle's axles. The wheels are bolted to the drums. The braking mechanism is inside the drum. To stop, the brake shoes and linings are pushed against the inside of the drum. This causes friction, which slows the vehicle and creates heat. The heat a drum can take without damage depends on how hard and how long the brakes are used. Too much heat can make the brake stop working. So if you watch the general knowledge portion of this series for this CDL prep, we talk extensively about expansion, brake expansion. Brake fading is the term they use. So they fade the brakes. We talked about that a lot, and excessive heat's what does that. You hold your brakes on too long, you're driving down a mountain, you're solely relying on your brakes. Eventually that drum is going to get hot, and when metal gets hot, it starts getting soft. And remember, we're also pushing, if you cut out here, we're pushing from only two sides, right? So we're pushing to the sides of that drum, and it's rolling. So we're stretching out that drum, causing it to expand. So that's why we're talking about too much heat can make the brake stop working, because we have a, look right here, we have a push rod and a slack adjuster. If we stretch this drum out too far, this push rod only pushes so far. So if I stretch it out too far, I'm not going to be able to push it hard enough to get it inside the drum here. So we don't want to get these hot and stretch or expand our drums. So we'll talk about the S-cam. When you push the brake pedal, air is let into each brake chamber from the storage tank to the chamber. Air pressure pushes the push rod, moving the slack adjuster. So it pushes linear here, and it pushes this, which causes that circular motion. So it pushes straight forward, push rod, it's pushing, slack adjuster, S-cam to the rollers, then it comes to the linings into the drums. This is informational. You're going to need to know more about the drummers. I just want you to have a little bit of understanding of how it works. And you can go on YouTube and look at some other sites and get some of these really cool videos of how an air brake system works and an S-cam system works. The manufacturers of these brakes have a lot of videos out that you can go watch and see, and it makes more sense. But I hope I'm explaining it well enough. You got pads and drums, and you got a way for it to work. So this back here, this round thing in the back, that's the chamber that I was talking about. And the push rod comes out of the chamber, slack adjuster, S-cam, linings, drum. You got an adjustment nut here. So these are automatic slack adjusters. They are adjusted by using them. Make sure you do your air brake test every day to make sure that you're actually adjusting. That's how you adjust them. They say, do air brakes, S-cams need to be adjusted often? Yes. When do you adjust them? When you find them out of adjustment. When do you adjust them? Usually during a pre-trip inspection, when we first notice them out of adjustment. Most of the time you can, if they're working properly by doing your air brake test, it's going to, this works like a ratchet wrench. So it's got little teeth and stuff in there, click, turn. So when we wear material off of these linings, you start losing material. It's not reaching the inside of the drum if we wear the material off. But if we push it hard enough by using the brake, click, it brings it right back into adjustment, automatic slack adjuster. That's a little bit idea. Maybe I'll talk too long about wedge brakes. This is informational. I don't think you'll see anything about wedge brakes, but if you do, the question will be what types you have, S-cam, wedge. S-cam's most common. Instead of using the S-cam, it's got a triangular wedge that just pushes the wedge in, separating the linings, pushing up against the drum. So instead of rotating, it's just a wedge. Disc brakes. We're seeing more and more disc brakes. Disc brakes, instead of having a drum on the outside, it's just like your car. There's a disc, a rotor, and you got two pads from the side that squeeze the disc. So they're getting more and more popular. I've got some trucks that have disc brakes on the front and then drum brakes on the back. My new Freightliners all have disc brakes all the way around, and I even have some trailers. I got a reefer trailer, which is a refrigerator trailer, that has disc brakes on it. So that unit has tractor and trailer disc brakes all the way around it. You get a lot more wear out of disc brakes. They can take a lot more heat than your drums as well, but disc brakes are more and more common. I don't know why they haven't until recently. Maybe it took them a long time to perfect the technology, but it's a little bit different because the disc brakes may not have that push rod and slack adjuster that's external. It's more like a caliper style. I'm not a mechanic, so I'm not going to try to tell you how the disc brakes work. But disc brakes, in air operated disc brakes, air pressure acts on a brake chamber and slack adjuster like S-cam brakes. But instead of the S-cam, a power screw is used. The pressure of the brake chamber on the slack adjuster turns the power screw. So instead of having the S-cam, it's got a screw that screws it in like a caliper. The power screw clamps the disc or rotor between the brake linings of the lining pads of a caliper, similar to a large C-clamp. So, like I say, caliper, right? Wedge brakes and disc brakes are less common than S-cams. This says 2005 model. Some of this stuff is still the 2005, but if you go further through the manuals and stuff, you'll see they have amendments that are updated to today's stuff. So when they wrote this, that is less common, that's not necessarily a true statement anymore. They're more and more common. Like I said, the trucks I just bought are not brand new, but 2023s, they've got a disc all the way around. So it's becoming more and more common because I think they're started perfecting this technology now that they couldn't have done 30 years ago or didn't have the ability to. We're going to move on to page 5-3. Down there at the bottom, coming up to section 5.1.9, supply pressure gauges. We're going to talk about these supply pressure gauges. So it's just exactly what it says in the name of it, supply pressure. How much air do I have in my storage tanks? Every air compressor, whether it's on a tractor trailer, on a dump truck, on a school bus, or the air compressor that you use in your home garage, has a supply gauge on it. So all our air compressors are required to have a supply gauge. We need to know how much air is in that system. They're always, now it gets tricky because they have also application gauges. When you apply the brake, it tells you how much pressure you're putting on the brakes. That is an optional gauge. A supply gauge is mandatory. All vehicles will be equipped with a supply gauge. And it shows you how much air pressure you're back up here. All vehicles with air brakes have a pressure gauge connected to the air tanks. If the vehicle has dual air brake system, there will be a gauge for each half of the system, or a single gauge with two needles. So you can have the same gauge with same numbers, but it'll have two needles, effectively having two gauges. Dual systems will be discussed later. These gauges tell you how much pressure is in the air tanks. This right here, all vehicles with air brakes have a pressure gauge. So you all have a supply gauge. Remember that word there. All have a supply pressure gauge. Application gauge 5.1.10. This gauge shows how much pressure you are applying the brakes. When I put my brake, shows how much pressure I'm putting onto it. This is the key word. This gauge is not on all vehicles. And this will be asked in some form when you're talking about supply and application. You need to know the difference between the two. All vehicles will have this one. This is an option. Okay, it's just an option. So remember that little fact there. Moving into 5.1.11, low air pressure warning. So if I'm driving down the road, I'm not constantly, I'm scanning my gauges periodically. I'm watching my mirrors every 12 to 15 seconds. I'm looking 12 to 15 seconds down the road. Let's say I run over something and it hits my air line and I start losing air pressure. I need a warning that I'm losing my air pressure, because if I don't have a warning, I lose all of my air pressure, and my emergency brakes come on by themselves, the tractor protection valves, they come on by themselves. I don't want them to come on by themselves without a warning. I want time to move off of the road to the breakdown lane or get off the road, and by having a low air warning light, it's going to give me that warning enough time to get off the road. So we need to make sure this light works. We need to make sure this low air warning works. If not, I don't have an early warning system to let me know that I'm losing my air pressure. So I'm going to read this a little bit. A low air pressure warning signal is required on vehicles with air brakes. Required. A warning signal can warning signal you can see must come on before the air pressure in the tanks fall below 60 psi. The warning is usually a red light. A buzzer may also come on. So a buzzer may also come on. Okay, that's an audible warning. All right. So the audible warning to lose air pressure is not mandatory, right? So it may come on. It may be a quick one. The manufacturers are putting extras in there. It's a good thing to have because you can hear it too. But what we're saying, so the audible is not mandatory, correct? But a low air is required. All right. So a low air warning signal is required on all vehicles with air brakes that you can see. It has to be a visual. In the older trucks, they had what they called a wig-wag. So before they had the lights and buzzers coming on, and I've never seen one. I've seen them at truck shows, but I've never seen one in person. I was in the Army, and I think we may have seen them there where they're mechanical. What it was, it set up here by your top of your windshield, and when your air pressure built up, you flip it's a metal flag. They call it a wig-wag. You push the flag up, and as long as it stayed up, you had air pressure. If it fell below 60 psi, that flag, metal flag, would come down and it would pop down in your field of view, so you could see that you had low air pressure. So that was your warning. Now we have lights, but just to know about the low air pressure warning, must have one, and it will come on when it falls below 60 psi. So we talked about those numbers. We have a cut in at 100. We have a cut out at 125. We have a safety valve to release air out of the tanks in case it builds too much pressure, a safety valve, and that's set at 150. Cut in 100, cut out 125, safety valve 150, low air warning 60 psi. What I'm talking about, these numbers you're going to have to memorize. These will be questions on your test, so memorize these numbers. Low air warning comes on at 60 psi. And you can read down here what I just explained about the wig-wag. That's a mechanical device. You can read it yourself. I don't have to read it to you. You can read just like I can. Moving into 5.1.12. This can be a trick question because it sounds like it's a complicated device or something. So, what is a stoplight switch? It's not a switch you flip on the dash. It's not a stoplight switch that you would think of that. What a stoplight switch is, it's a switch underneath your brake pedal. So it's a switch connected to your brake pedal. When I put my brakes on, my brake lights on my car comes on, or my truck comes on, or my bike or my motorcycle. Anything that has lights on the back, you hit the brakes, the light comes on. That's what a stoplight switch is. It's not a switch on the dash, nothing like that. It's just connected to your underneath your brake pedal, so it activates the lights on the back. So drivers behind you must be warned when you put on your brakes. The air system does this with an electric switch that works by air pressure. The switch turns on the brake lights when you put on the brakes. So don't get confused. You will get a question about stoplight switch and it'll confuse you. Don't let it confuse you. It's just exactly what it is. It's a stoplight switch. When I put my brakes on, my brake lights on my trailer or my tractor or my bus or whatever I'm driving comes on. Brake lights come on. That's that simple. Moving to 5.1.3, you may get a question about front brake limiting valve. You may. So this applies to older vehicles, and we'll talk about what it does. So some older vehicles made before 1975 have a front brake limiting valve and a control in the cab. The control is usually marked normal and slippery. When you put the control in the slippery position, the limiting valve cuts the normal air pressure to the front brakes by half. So in the old trucks, they used to think that on rain or snow that you'd have better braking power and better control if we limited how much braking pressure we just put on our steer tires, on our steer axles. But technology today is advanced. We don't need that. It's not even required. It's something they done before 75. So it's not needed. I'm not sure why we're still talking about it. I don't know if there's any vehicles on the road that has a limiting valve on it. It's just not required. You have better braking power with braking power. Make sure they're adjusted, but you're going to have better braking power with all your brakes working, even in the rain, snow, or ice or anything else. How you brake is different. You need some practice with that, how you do it. But as far as needing that braking power, we need that nowadays. So when you put the control in slippery position, the limiting valve cuts the normal air pressure to the front brakes by half. Limiting valves were used to reduce the chance of front wheel skidding on slippery surfaces. However, they actually reduce the stopping power of the vehicle. Front wheel braking is good under all conditions. Tests have shown front wheel skids from braking are not likely to occur even on ice. Make sure the control is in the normal position to have normal stopping power. You will never see one unless you go buy a truck before 1975, and you probably wouldn't drive that one. You probably take it to the Louisville Truck Show once a year to show it off, right? But it is a question. What does a limiting valve do? It limits how much air pressure is sent to the front brakes. Limit in the name, limiting valve, it limits how much air is sent to the front brakes. Many vehicles have automatic front wheel limiting valves. They reduce the air to the front brakes except when the brakes are put on very hard. These valves cannot be controlled by the driver. So if they do have them, it's not something you're going to turn a knob slippery and normal, right? So you may get a question about limiting valve. Just remember the word limiting. And what's it limiting? It's limiting how much air pressure is sent to the steer axle, the front axle. 5.1.14, spring brakes. So we have air brakes, we have spring brakes. We don't have two pedals. We don't have to. It's in that chamber that we came back here on this, the page before with this little diagram here on the figure 5.2. It's hard to see back here, but look at your book if you have it in front of you, or you can zoom in here. This is the chamber. Okay, and inside this chamber, not all of them, because you have some service brake chambers usually on your steer axles, but on your drive axles and your trailer axles, sometimes you have a service and you only got one on one axle. Sometimes most trucks have them on both axles. So the brake chamber is divided into two sections. One with a spring brake and a service brake. It's pretty big, and you can know if it has spring brakes and service brakes by looking at the chamber. If it has two air hoses going into it, it has spring and service side. So when you start the engine, remember you got the two sides, you got a spring over here, and they have diaphragms in the middle to help seal the air. So over here is the spring side. When I turn the engine on and I build pressure and I release my brakes, it sends air to this chamber where the spring's at, and that diaphragm compresses the spring. It compresses it so that the push rod and slack adjuster can be used by the service side. That's what the second hose is for. That's my brake pedals. So when I use the brake pedal, the service side pushes the push rod, and we're compressing the spring brake. If that spring brake side leaks, or that air hose leaks, that air pressure is going to go away, and it's going to mechanically engage your brakes. It's the same brake chamber. It's just divided into two parts, spring side and service side. So just an idea, a little explanation of how it works, what it does. I'm going to read what it says here. All trucks, tractors, and buses must be equipped with emergency brakes and parking brakes. So emergency brakes, you have them on your car. That can be a mechanical, right? And it's also got to have parking brakes, what can be the same thing. Newer cars, I've noticed that you got a button you push, and it pushes it down with hydraulics. So that's a new technology that's fairly new. But we're talking about air brake systems. So spring brakes, they must be equipped with emergency and parking brakes. They must be held on by mechanical force. So mechanical force, get used to hearing that. What is a spring? A spring, a coiled up spring, that's a big spring. It's in combination with all these springs working effective, they can stop 80,000 pounds. So they're pretty tough systems, pretty strong systems. But it is mechanical force. The reason you want mechanical force is because, like I described earlier, if the air leaks away, you don't have service brakes, right? They're not working. If you don't have air, you don't have regular service brakes. So it's a backup system. So if the air leaks away, that mechanical spring will engage the push rod and stop the vehicle. So it's a backup system. Parking, use it for parking, use it for emergency brakes. It's the same system. It's the same one. It's not three different systems. It's just what are they doing at the time to determine what you're going to call. If I'm parking on the parking lot, it's a parking brake. If it's a emergency situation, I'm trying to use my foot brakes and I'm pulling my emergency brakes. Both of them are trying to work together to get me stopped. If you lose all of your air, that mechanical pressure will stop you. And you'll hear a bunch of truck drivers tell you that, oh, that you pull that thing, it's going to come to a screeching halt. It's not. Air pressure doesn't dump that fast. It's going to be a gradual stop. It's not going to be a screeching stop like a lot of these truck drivers want to scare you into believing. It's not that case. If you don't believe me, when you do get your CDL, find you a parking lot somewhere, get about 5 or 10 miles per hour and pop your brakes and see what happens. It's going to be a nice gradual stop. I've even had it happen where I lost the airline and lost my air pressure at 60 miles an hour. My air warning light comes on, and I was like, well, I got to get off the road. And I started coming off the road, my air pressure, and it just brought me to a nice, easy stop. So it's not going to be a screeching halt. But the key word here is why do we need spring brakes? It's because air pressure can eventually leak away. So this is the part of this paragraph that you need to put the most focus on. Mechanical force. Because air pressure can eventually leak away. That's what you need to know about these spring brakes. So tractor and straight truck spring brakes will come fully on when air pressure drops to a range of 20 to 45 psi. So we're working on these numbers again. Cut in at 100, cut out at 125. Safety valve opens up and releases air out of your storage tank. So safety valve is set for 150. Your low air warning light comes on before 60 psi. Now we're talking about the spring brakes engaging themselves. They'll come on automatically between 20 and 45 psi. Those are the numbers that you really need to focus on. I'm going to go over it one more time. Cut in 100, cut out 125. Safety valve 150. Low air warning light 60, before 60. They may call it something else. They may call it tractor protection valve, but the spring brakes will come on. Your emergency brakes will come on by themselves if the air pressure drops below 20 and 45 psi. So there's your numbers. That's a big part of your test. I think it's only a 20 or 25 question test, and that's already 4 or 5 answers already. Parking brake controls. In newer vehicles with air brakes, you put on the parking brakes using the diamond-shaped yellow push-pull control knob. You got a red, if you got Class A, you got a red and a yellow knob. The yellow one's for parking. That's how you pull it out. Think about your handbrake on your car. On my car, I pull the handle up. If I want to drive, I push it down to release the brakes. It's on the dash. I pull it out to park. I push it in to release the brakes. What that does is sends air to the chamber to compress that spring we were talking about. That's a lot of information, but in the go, out the stop. And it's mechanical pressure. It's not being held in place by air pressure. In newer vehicles with air brakes, you can put on the parking brakes using the diamond-shaped yellow push-in pull control knob. You pull the knob out to put on the parking brakes, spring brakes, right? And push it in to release them. On older vehicles, the parking brakes may be controlled by a lever. Use the parking brakes whenever you park. There will have some trick questions in there because you have we call it a trolley bar, a Johnny bar, a trailer bar. It can be right here at your steering wheel on the right side. It can be a lever that you pull down on the dash. That is not a spring brake. That is a service brake that isolates the air brakes on the trailer. So when you're doing your pre-trip inspection, you can isolate just the trailer to make sure the brakes are working properly. That is the only practical use that we have for that hand valve. When is it okay to use the hand valve for parking? Never. Never. If I'm getting out of the truck for 5 seconds, never. The parking brake is the only thing you use for parking. So that'll be a trick question. Not really a trick question, but something you need to think about. Never use that hand valve for anything other than pre-trip. So this is one of my biggest hurdles to overcome with new drivers in practical use. And I'm not talking about the written test, but when you do get a CDL or a permit and you go do your training, you're damaging the vehicle. You're damaging it. So right here it says never push the brake pedal down when the spring brakes are on. Okay? It says right there, never. Never do it. So there's a few nevers when we're doing this. The reason we do it is because A, we're not used to it. We're used to driving a car. nervous habit. You don't think about it. It's a habit sometimes you don't even know you're doing. The parking brake is set. Remember, we talked about air brakes, and we'll talk more about brake lag, but it's a delay in the system. So before you put your foot onto the brake pedal, don't put your foot on the brake pedal to start it like you do your car every day. I don't know why you do it. It's already in park. I don't understand why you do it. Maybe it's a safety in there. I don't know. But don't put your foot on the brake pedal and then push in the yellow control knob. It has a brake lag, it has a delay, and every truck I've had, it's longer than 3 seconds. So what you want to do is release your yellow button quickly and shortly. Don't use the palm of your hand to destroy it. That stuff's made out of plastic and rubber, so don't destroy it by using too much muscle. You'll hear air expelling from it, so you just keep pushing. It's supposed to have air expel from it, so don't keep pushing. Just get it in, count to 3, and then put your foot on the brake pedal. Notice how I didn't use them at the same time. I gave it time to release some of that pressure out of my chambers. By using your foot pedal and your spring brakes at the same time, you're going to end up broke down a lot. You're going to bust a lot of brake chambers. And I'm not talking about the diaphragms, I'm talking about the springs. It may not happen the first time, but a habit like that, day after day, every time you start the truck or every time you move, you're putting your foot on the brake pedal before you release your brakes, you're going to damage it. Never push the brake pedal down when the spring brakes are on. Modulating control valve. So this modulating control valve, we talked about the limiting valve. The limiting valve limits how much air pressure is sent to your front brakes on older vehicles, right? Normal and slippery. Limits how much air. Modulating control valves, and again, not something you'll ever see, I don't believe. If you do, you'll just have to let me know because I've never seen one. In some vehicles, a control handle on the dashboard may be used to apply the spring brakes gradually. So modulating. Where limiting valve controls air, modulating controls springs. Limiting air, modulating spring. Keep those things in mind, they go together, right? I don't know if you'll see it on your test. Maybe they'll ask a question about it because it's in the book, but every state's different. So if you're taking it from a different state and you have a question about modulating valves and limiting valves, let me know. I'll enjoy the feedback, and if we hear it, we'll add it to our curriculum. In some vehicles, a control handle on the dashboard may be used to apply the spring brakes gradually. This is called a modulating valve. It is spring loaded so you have a feel for the braking action. The more you move the control lever, the harder the spring brakes come on. They work this way so you can control the spring brakes if the service brakes fail. We do it automatically now. We have tractor protection valves that does that for us, so we don't have a need for that. When parking a vehicle with a modulating control valve, move the lever as far as it will go and hold it in place with the locking device. So it'll look like, let me see, I don't see one here. So if you have don't confuse it talked about it could be a lever on the dash or on the steer column. Don't confuse that with that's not a modulating control valve. That is a service brake that only operates the trailer brakes. That's a trailer brake. With Johnny bar, a trolley valve, whatever you want to call it, it's service brake. It's not spring operated. You're just isolating the service brakes on the trailer. You can isolate the spring brakes as well just by setting the spring brakes on the trailer, and you isolate both of them during your pre-trip inspection, so you'll check your springs and your service brakes. But don't confuse the two. Don't confuse this with it's not a modulating valve. Just remember the two things when it comes to modulating and limiting. Limiting valve limits air, modulating controls springs. If you can remember that, you're ahead of everybody else. Dual parking control valves. When main air pressure is lost, the spring brakes come on. I told you that earlier, it comes on by themselves, right? Some vehicles, such as buses, have a separate air tank which can be used to release the spring brakes. This is so you can move the vehicle in an emergency. One of the halves is a push-pull type and is used to put on the spring brakes for parking. The other valve is a spring loaded in the out position. When you push the control in, air from the separate air tank releases the spring so you can move on. When you release the button, the spring brakes will come on again. There is only enough air in this separate tank to do this a few times. Therefore, plan carefully when moving. Otherwise, you may be stopped in a dangerous location when this separate air supply runs out. Just read that a couple times. You may get a question about it, maybe not. DMV loves being tricky and asking trick questions, so good luck. 5.1.16, anti-lock braking system. If you watched the general knowledge, we went over anti-lock braking systems in general knowledge. We're going to go over it again. Again, everything we're going to do from the general knowledge, everything builds off of that general knowledge, so you'll get a lot of repetitive questions that you already know the answers to. Anti-lock braking system, ABS. The trucks with air brakes built on or after March 1, 1997, and other brake vehicles such as trailers, buses, converter dollies on March 1, 1998 are required to be equipped with anti-lock brakes. Your car has anti-lock brakes. Many commercial vehicles built before these dates have been voluntarily equipped. So I had ABS in 1994 when I was driving that 1992 Kenworth T600 I told you about. It's been around a while, but manufacturers came out with it for safety reasons and started putting them on before they were forced to by the government. In 1997 when they came out for trucks, and everything else came out after 1998. Vehicles with ABS have a yellow malfunction lamps to tell you if something's wrong. So how do you know if your vehicle has ABS? When you turn your key to the on position, your dashboard lights up. You'll see a bunch of, they're called telltale lights. These telltale lights will come on, and what that does is tells you, because these are light bulbs in the dash, it tells you that these systems are working and the lights are working in the dash, right? So they come on and go off usually. You look on your dash, you turn the key to the on position, the ABS light comes on and goes off, your vehicle's equipped with ABS. How do I know if the trailer has ABS? When you do that again, just turn it to the on position, look at your dash, look in your mirror on the left side, the driver's side. Look at the tail of the trailer, the very back of the trailer. You'll see an amber light come on and go off. That is ABS on your trailers. So that's how you can tell if your vehicle is equipped with ABS. Not all vehicles have ABS. Like it says, if it's built before 1998, trailers may not have it. Now, there's still a bunch of old trailers out there running around. Check to see if your vehicle has it. And it's the same thing I just told you. Trailers have it. This may be a question if trailers will have an ABS on the left side. It said maybe on the front or rear corner. I've never seen one on the front corner. It's always been on the back corner for us. Dollies, those are the things that go in between. Let's say you're doing doubles or triples and you got a pintle hook with a set of tires and a fifth wheel on top of it. That's a converter dolly to convert that dolly into a fifth wheel platform to connect more than one trailer. Those are mandatory. 1998, March 1998. On newer vehicles, the malfunction lamp comes on at the startup for a bulb check and then goes out quickly. On older systems, the lamp could stay on until you are driving over 5 miles per hour. If the lamp stays on after the bulb check or goes on once you are underway, you may have lost ABS control at one or more wheels. In the case of towed units manufactured before it was acquired by the Department of Transportation, it will be difficult to tell if the unit is equipped with ABS. Look under the vehicle for the electronic control unit, the ECU, the wheel speed sensor wires coming from the back of the brake. So if you'll see your air hoses, they'll usually be zip tied to the air hoses, but it's new enough. You won't see it. This is not going to be something you worry about for the test, I don't believe. Take you a little second here to look at your diagram. We're moving down to page 5.5. You got a diagram that gives you the system. So it's got you got a trailer this side, you got a tractor this side. Let's see the air system. We have a compressor. You got a check valve that only goes one way so it doesn't come back. It goes to your wet tank, which compresses the air. Then the air gets compressed and comes over here. Your safety valve, you see here on this wet tank, that first tank that it goes into, that's the 150-pound safety valve. There's a tank. When I push the brake, there's my foot pedal. It sends it to my chambers, and in return, the chambers operate the push rod and slack adjuster, therefore setting the brakes. You'll notice the trailer doesn't have its own air compressor. It uses the air compressor from the tractor. So that's why it has a red and a blue air line going from the tractor to the trailer and in between the catwalk there. The red line is a trailer air supply. People call it an emergency line. If you want to, I guess it is. But it supplies air to your tank because the trailer doesn't have its own air supply. The blue line is the service. So red emergency, blue service. When I hit my brakes, it sends air through the blue line. So because the airline fills the tanks on the emergency red line, the trailer air supply, the red one, it's always on the right side. If I have that release pushed in, and while it's running, I can pull that airline, the glad hand off, and it will expel constant flow of air. To the point of, I can even, at the truck stops, you can even get an airline that has a tire gauge, or not gauge, but a filler. I can even air up my tires with that emergency line. So it's constant air up to 125 psi, remember? So that's going to constantly flow. If that flows while that button's pushing and it's flowing out, that airline comes apart. Eventually, when it hits between 20 and 45 psi, it's going to shut it off. Remember that emergency shut off, that 20 to 45 psi, it engages tractor protection valve. That's what it's doing, protecting the tractor. So when that happens, the trailer no longer has brakes or air going to the brakes. What happens back there? The spring brakes take over, and the spring brakes on the trailer comes on. The tractor protection valve closes between 20 and 45 psi. That's what you expect to happen if that comes apart. Now, what about the blue line, the service line? If it's running, like I just told you, if I pull the red line off, it's just going to throw air out to the atmosphere. If I pull the blue line off, what's going to happen? Nothing. Unless you hit the brake, because that operates the service brakes. It doesn't have constant airflow. It only has air when you push the brake pedal in. So you may not, if they come apart, the red line, you're going to know, the emergency line, you're going to know pretty quickly because you're going to lose air pressure. Your warning light's going to come on. Your spring brakes on your trailer is going to come on. The tractor protection valve is going to close at 20 to 45 psi. But the blue one, I may not know until I go to use my brakes. If that line came apart when I'm driving, I go hit my brakes, and all of a sudden when I hit my brakes, I start losing air. And every time I hit my brake, I lose air. That tells me my service side is leaking somewhere, or the lines come apart. We'll get into that in a second because it's going to add that. Those will be testable questions. There will be things that you want to talk about, but we're getting ready to discuss some of that. So let's go back to ABS. We talked about that at length in general knowledge. So ABS is in addition to your normal brakes. If you have a malfunction light on, use your brakes normally using controlled braking. Controlled braking is pushing as hard as I can without locking up the brakes. If I do that with vehicles equipped with ABS, it's going to do the braking for me. It's going to keep you in a straight line. It's not going to make you stop shorter or faster, but it will keep you in control of the vehicle. If you drive a vehicle without ABS, you will use stab braking. And we talked about that in general knowledge, where stab braking is the vehicle doesn't have ABS. It's not equipped with ABS. Don't do this just because it's a malfunction light. Don't use stab braking on a vehicle equipped with ABS, even if it has a malfunction light. Stop normal controlled braking. So stab braking is on vehicles without ABS. You have an emergency situation, you push the brakes as hard as you can to lock up the wheels. They stop turning. As soon as they stop turning, they'll probably screech a little bit, let off the brake again. And when they start rolling again, I do it again and again until the vehicle comes to a stop. That you're stabbing the brake pedal. That is called stab braking. Again, you're going to have ABS, but you're going to need to know the difference between stab braking and controlled braking for your test. Do not use stab braking with ABS vehicles. If you have ABS vehicles and a malfunction light is on, stop normally. Do not use stab braking on vehicles equipped with ABS, even if it's malfunctioning, because all the wheels are not going to be malfunctioning. It's better to have the other ones. If you only have one that's malfunctioning out of 5-6 axles, right? Only one's malfunctioning or two, you still have the other ones working. So here's your brake system. You look at that. Let's come on down to page 5-6 and let's get to this test your knowledge. We'll get to this test your knowledge. I'll give you a break before the next section. So subsection 5.1, test your knowledge. All right, I'm going to give you more questions than what's on here too, because I know some of the stuff is going to be on your test. Why must air tanks be drained? Because water freezes in the wintertime. And in air tanks, if you don't drain them, there's going to be water and oil. You're going to freeze. So why must they be drained? Because water freezes. That's going to be your answer. What is a supply gauge used for? Supply pressure gauge. Supply gauge tells me how much air, usable air, is in my system. How much my supplies. You have a fuel tank, it tells you how much fuel you have. A supply gauge is a tank that tells me how much air I have in my system. So think of it, air as fuel for my brake system, right? It tells me how much is in there. Is it required? Yes, a supply gauge is required. Is an application gauge required? How much I apply? No, it's not required. It's an option. Remember that. All vehicles with air brakes must have a low air pressure warning signal. True or false? True. It must. Visual. You must see it. Do they have to have an audible signal? Nope. Does not have to have audible. It does have to have a visual signal. What are spring brakes? The spring brakes are a mechanical brake that applies the brakes when I park or in an emergency situation. Why do we need spring brakes? Because air or fluid can leak away. Mechanical pressure is spring. Springs cannot leak away. That's why we need spring brakes. Front wheel brakes are good under all conditions. True or false? We talked about that limiting valve. If you read that paragraph, back in the old days before 1975, they would used to cut out and limit how much air. But if you read further in that paragraph, it's been determined that front brakes are good under all situations. We don't have the need for that anymore. Front wheel brakes are good under all conditions. Yes, absolutely. You need all of your brakes. Yes. How do you know if your vehicle is equipped with anti-lock brakes? Give you a second. How do you know your car has an anti-lock brakes? Remember those lights that come on and go off? If it's on the trailer, you'll look on the left side and it'll come on and go off there too, right? That's how you know you have ABS. We'll take a break there. We'll come back and start with 5.2 dual air brakes. Thank you for joining us so far. See you in a minute.